1925 Serum Run to Nome. The 1925 Serum Run to Nome, also known as the Great Race of Mercy and the Serum Run, was a transport of diphtheria antitoxin by dog sled relay across the U.S. territory of Alaska by 20 mushers and about 150 sled dogs across 674 miles 1,085 days, saving the small town of Nome and the surrounding communities from a developing epidemic of diphtheria. Transport of medication by dog sled relay across Alaska above the historical and current Iditarod trails. The route taken during the 1925 Serum Run is shown in green above. The mushers and their dogs were portrayed as heroes in the newly popular medium of radio and received headline coverage in newspapers across the United States. Balto, the lead sled dog on the final stretch into Nome, became the most famous canine celebrity of the era after Tintin, and his statue is a popular tourist attraction in both New York City's Central Park and downtown Anchorage, Alaska, but it was Togo's team which covered much of the most dangerous parts of the route and ran the farthest. Togo's team covered 261 miles, 420 km, while Balto's team ran 55 miles, 89 km. The publicity also helped spur an inoculation campaign in the U.S. which dramatically reduced the threat of the disease. Location and geography. A view of Nome in Nome, Alaska, lies approximately 2 degrees south of the Arctic Circle, and while greatly diminished from its peak of 20,000 inhabitants during the gold rush at the turn of the 20th century, it was still the largest town in northern Alaska in 1925, with 455 Alaskan natives and 975 settlers of European descent, 16 from November to July. The port on the southern shore of the Seward Peninsula of the Bering Sea was eastbound and inaccessible by steamship. The only link to the rest of the world during the winter was the Iditarod Trail, which ran 938 miles 1,510 km from the port of Seward in the south, across several mountain ranges and the vast Alaska interior, to the town of Nome, in Alaska and other Subarctic regions. The primary source of mail and needed supplies in 1925 was the dog sled. However, within a decade, bush flying would become the dominant method of transportation during the winter months. Outbreak and call for help. In the winter of, Curtis Welch was the only doctor in Nome. He and 4 nurses, working at the small Maynard Columbus Hospital, served the town and the surrounding area. After discovering the hospital's entire batch of diphtheria antitoxin had expired, Welch placed an order for more. However, the replacement shipment did not arrive before the port was closed by ice for the winter, and more could not be shipped into Nome until spring. 48 in December 1924, several days after the last ship left the port, Welch treated a few children for what he first diagnosed as sore throats or tonsillitis, initially dismissing diphtheria as a possibility. Given its contagious nature, Welch would have expected to see more symptoms in family members or others around town, instead of a few isolated cases. In the next few weeks, after the number of cases grew and 4 children whom Welch had not been able to autopsy became increasingly concerned about diphtheria. By mid-January 1925, Welch officially diagnosed the first case of diphtheria in a 3-year-old boy who died only 2 weeks after first becoming ill. The following day, when a 7-year-old girl presented the same telltale symptoms of diphtheria, Welch attempted to administer some of the expired antitoxin to see if it might still have any effect, but the girl died a few hours later. Realizing that an epidemic was imminent, Welch called Nome's mayor, George Maynard, that same evening to arrange an emergency town council meeting. The council immediately implemented a quarantine. The following day, on January 22, 1925, Welch sent radio telegrams to all other major towns in Alaska alerting them of the public health risk. He also requested assistance from the U.S. Public Health Service in Washington. An epidemic of diphtheria is almost inevitable here. STOP I am in urgent need of 1 million units of diphtheria antitoxin. STOP mail is only form of transportation. STOP I have made application to Commissioner of Health of the Territories for antitoxin already. STOP there are about 3,000 white natives in the district despite the quarantine. There were over 20 confirmed cases of diphtheria and at least 50 more at risk by the end of January. Without antitoxin, it was expected that in the surrounding region's population of around 10,000 people, the mortality rate could be close to 100%. A previous influenza pandemic had hit the area in 1918, causing fatalities in about a percent of the native population of Nome and a percentage of the native population of Alaska. More than 1,000 people died in northwest Alaska and approximately 2,000 across the state. The majority were Alaska natives who did not have any resistance to either disease. 4250. Problem solving. At the January 24 meeting of the Board of Health, Superintendent Mark Summers of the Hammond Consolidated Goldfields proposed a Doxald relay using two fast teams. One would start at Neenah, Alaska, the closest railhead on the Alaska Railroad, and the other at Nome, and they would meet roughly halfway in the town of Nulato. The trip from Nulato to Nome normally took 30 days. Curtis Welch estimated that the serum would last only 6 days under the brutal conditions of the trail. Summers' employee, the Norwegian sled dog trainer and musher Leonhard Sapala, was chosen for the 630-mile 1,014 km round trip from Nome to Nulato and back. He had previously made the run in a record-breaking 4 days, won the All-Alaska Sweepstakes 3 times, and had become famous for his athletic ability and rapport with his Siberian Huskies. His lead dog, the 12-year-old Togo, was equally famous for his leadership, intelligence, and ability to sense. Danger Maynard proposed flying the antitoxin by plane. In 1925, planes were relatively new technology, and Alaska's harsh winter weather made them unreliable. Several test flights had been conducted the previous year between Fairbanks and McGrath, Alaska, to determine how well a reliable aircraft could handle the winter conditions. The longest test flight flew a distance of only 260 miles, 420, a little under half the necessary distance between Neenah and Nome. Furthermore, the only planes operating in Alaska in 1925 were 3 vintage biplanes, which had been dismantled for the winter. Their open cockpits and water-cooled engines would make these planes unfit for the trip as well. Although it was potentially quicker, the proposal to deliver the antitoxin by flight was rejected by the Board of Health. Instead, they voted unanimously for the Doxald relay. Sapala was notified that evening and immediately began preparations for the trip. The U.S. Public Health Service had located 1.1 million units of serum in West Coast hospitals, which could be shipped to Seattle, Washington, and then transported to Alaska. The next ship north would not arrive in Seattle until January 31, and it would take another 6 to 7 days to arrive in Seward. On January 26, however, 300,000 forgotten units of the antitoxin were located in a hospital in Anchorage. The supply was wrapped in glass vials, then padded quilts, and finally a metallic cylinder weighing a little over 20 pounds 9. At Governor Scott Bohm's order, it was immediately shipped to Neenah and arrived the next day. While not sufficient to defeat the epidemic, the 300,000 units could slow the spread of the disease until the larger shipment arrived. Temperatures across the Alaskan interior were at 20-year lows due to a high-pressure system from the Arctic. In Fairbanks, the temperature was FC. Winds reaching speeds of 25 miles per hour 40 could cause snow to cover the Alaska Panhandle and snowdrifts up to 10 foot 3 m tall. Travel by sea was hazardous, and across the interior, most forms of transportation shut down. Furthermore, there were limited hours of daylight to fly due to the polar night. Relay. The mail route from Neenah to Nome spanned 674 miles, 1,085 km total. It crossed the barren Alaska interior, following the Tanana River for 137 miles, 220 km to the village Tanana at the junction with the Yukon River, and then following the Yukon for 230 miles, 370 km to Caltic. The route then passed west 90 miles, 140 km over the Caltic portage to Unalakleet on the shore of Norton Sound. The route then continued for 208 miles, 335 km northwest around the southern shore of the Seward Peninsula with no protection from gales and blizzards, including a 42-mile 68 km stretch across the shifting ice of the Bering Seaward. Wetzler, the U.S. Postal Service inspector for Neenah, contacted Tom Parson, an agent of the Northern Commercial Company, contracted to deliver mail between Fairbanks and Unalakleet. Telephones and telegraphs turned the drivers back to their assigned roadhouses. The mail carriers held a revered position in the territory and were the best dog mushers in Alaska. The majority of relay drivers across the interior were native Athabascans, direct descendants of the original dog mushers. The first musher in the relay was Wild Bill Shannon, who was handed the 20 pounds 9 package at the train station in Nenana on January 27 at 9 p.m. AKST by night. Despite a temperature of FC, Shannon left immediately with his team of 9 inexperienced dogs. Led by Blackie, the temperature began to drop, and the team was forced onto the colder ice of the river because the trail had been destroyed by horses despite jogging alongside the sled to keep warm. Shannon developed hypothermia. He reached Minto at 3 a.m. with parts of his face black from frostbite. The temperature was FC. After warming the serum by the fire and resting for 4 hours, Shannon dropped 3 dogs and left with the remaining 8. The 3 dogs died shortly after Shannon returned for them, and a 4th may have died as well. Half Athabascan Edgar Callan arrived in Minto the night before and was sent back to Tolovina, traveling 17,110 the day before the relay. Shannon and his team arrived in bad condition at 11 a.m. and handed over the serum. After warming the serum in the roadhouse, Callan headed into the forest. The temperature had fallen to FC, causing Callan's hands to freeze to the sled's handlebar, requiring the owner of the Manly Hot Springs Roadhouse to pour boiling water on the birchwood bar for thawing. No new cases of diphtheria were diagnosed on January 28, but 2 new cases were diagnosed on January 29. The quarantine had been obeyed, but lack of diagnostic tools and the contagiousness of the strain rendered it ineffective. More units of serum were discovered around Juneau the same day. While no count exists, the estimate based on weight is roughly 125,000 units, enough to treat 4 to 6 patients. The crisis had become headline news in newspapers, including in San Francisco, Cleveland, Washington, D.C., and New York, and spread to the radio sets which were just becoming common. The storm system from Alaska hit the contiguous United States, bringing record lows to New York and freezing the Hudson River. A 5th death occurred on January 30. Maynard and Alaskan House Delegate Daniel Sutherland renewed their campaign for flying the remaining serum by plane. Different proposals included flying a large aircraft 2,000 miles, 3,200 from Seattle to Nome, carrying a plane to the edge of the pack ice via Navy ship and launching it, and the original plan of flying the serum from Fairbanks. Despite receiving headline coverage across the country and support from Arctic explorer Roald Amundsen, the plans were rejected by experienced pilots, the Navy, and Governor Bone. As publisher and editor of the Fairbanks Daily News minor newspaper, William Fentress Thompson harshly criticized government officials for inaction and funded a private fleet of plants. In response, Governor Bone decided to speed up the relay, authorizing additional drivers for Sepala's leg of the relay so they could travel without rest. Sepala was still scheduled to cover the most dangerous leg, the shortcut across Norton Sound, but the telephone and telegraph systems bypassed the small villages he was passing through, and there was no way to tell him to wait at Shaktoolik. The plan relied on the driver from the north catching Sepala on the trail. Summers arranged for drivers along the last leg, including Sepala's collie Gunner Cousin from Manly Hot Springs. The serum passed through largely Athabascan hands before George Nolmer delivered it to Charlie Evans of Bishop Mountain on January 30 at 3 a.m. The temperature had warmed slightly, but at FC was dropping again. Evans relied on his lead dogs when he passed through ice fog where the Cayucuk River, flowing into the Yukon, had broken through and surged over the ice, but forgot to protect the groins of his 2 short-haired mixed-breed led dogs with rabbit skins. Both dogs collapsed with frostbite, with Evans having to take their place himself pulling the sled. He arrived at 10 a.m. Both dogs were dead. Tommy Patsy departed within half an hour's transport of the serum, then parted ways with the Yukon River as the river turned south and the trail crossed the Celtic portage west to the coast. Athabascan Jack Nikolai, at the Jack Screw, took it up the first half of the portage to Old Woman Cabin, and Victor Anajik of the Inupiat village on Alacleet, having driven up to meet him there, took it down the second half, handing it to his fellow villager Miles Ghanaian on the shores of Norton Sound in Unalakleet on January 31 at 5 am. Ghanaian saw the signs of a storm brewing and decided not to take the shortcut across the dangerous ice of the Sound. He departed at 5:30 am, and as he crossed the hills, the eddies of drifting, swirling snow passing between the dog's legs and under the bellies made them appear to be fording a fast-running river. 203 The whiteout conditions cleared as he reached the shore, and the gale force winds drove the wind chill to FC. At 3 he arrived at Shaktoolik. Sapala was not there, but Henry Ivanov was waiting just in case. In January 30, the number of cases in Nome had reached 27 and the antitoxin was depleted. According to a reporter living in Nome, all hope is in the dogs and their heroic drivers. Nome appears to be a deserted city. 205 With the report of Ghanaian's progress on January 31, Welch believed the serum would arrive there in February. Lonehard Sapala with his dogs after the serum run in 1925. His lead dog, Togo, on the far left. Lonehard Sapala and his dog sled team, with his lead dog Togo, traveled 91 miles 146 from Nome from January 27 to January 31 into the oncoming storm. They took the shortcut across the Norton Sound and headed toward Shaktoolik. The temperature in Nome was a relatively warm FC, but in Shaktoolik the temperature was estimated at FC, and the gale force winds causing a wind chill of FC. Henry Ivanov's team ran into a reindeer and got tangled up just outside Shaktoolik. Sapala still believed he had more than 160 to the original relay point in Nulato to go and had raced to get off the Norton Sound before the storm hit. He was passing the team when Ivanov shouted, the serum, I have it here." 207 Sapala turned around with the serum, but it was dark by the time he got to Ungalik. But with the news of the worsening epidemic Ivanov had shared, he decided not to stop and once again set out to brave the storm across the 20 miles 32 of exposed open ice of the Norton Sound. The temperature was estimated at FC, but the wind chill with the gale force winds was FC. Togo led the team in a straight line through the dark, and they arrived at the roadhouse in Isaacs Point on the other side at 8. In one day, they had traveled 84 mi 135 km, averaging 8 miles per hour 13 km. The team rested and departed at 2 am into the full power of the storm during the night. The temperature dropped to FC, and the wind increased to storm force at least 65 miles per hour. While they slept, it had blown out to sea all the ice Sapala had just crossed. There was still some ice close to shore for the next part of their journey along the coast, but it was rough and starting to break up too. They stuck close to shore, and Togo picked his way carefully until they were back on solid ground. Next they had to cross Little McKinley Mountain 1,200 feet, another of the toughest parts of the trail because of the many up and down ridges. The total elevation climbed in that section of over 8 miles 13 km 5,000 feet 1,500 m. After descending to the next roadhouse in Golovin, Sapala passed the serum to Charlie Olson on February 1 at 3 p.m. February 1, the number of cases in Nome rose to 28. The serum en route was sufficient to treat 30 people. With the powerful blizzard raging and winds of 80 miles per hour 130 km, Welch ordered a stop to the relay until the storm passed, reasoning that a delay was better than the risk of losing it all. Messages were left at Solomon and Point Safety before the lines when Diedelson was blown off the trail and suffered severe frostbite in his hands while putting blankets on his dogs. The wind chill was FC. He arrived at Bluff on February 1 at 7 in poor condition. Gunnar Kazan waited until 10 for the storm to break, but it only got worse, and the drifts would soon block the trail. So he departed into a headwind to Gunnar Kazan with Balto, the lead dog for the team. He drove in the serum rumpus and traveled through the night, through drifts and river overflow over the 600-foot 183 m Topic Mountain. Balto led the team through visibility so poor that Kazan could not always see the dogs harnessed closest to the sled. He was 2 miles 3 past Solomon before he realized it, and kept going. The winds after Solomon were so severe that his sled flipped over and he almost lost the cylinder containing the serum when it fell off and became buried in the snow. He also suffered frostbite when he had to use his bare hands to feel for the cylinder. Kazan reached Point Safety ahead of schedule on February 2. At 3 am, Edron believed that Kazan and the relay had halted at Solomon. so he was sleeping. Since the weather was improving, it would take time to prepare Roan's team, and Balto and the other dogs were moving well. Kazan pressed on with the remaining 25 miles 40 to Nome, reaching Front Street at 5:30 a.m. Not a single ampule was broken, and the antitoxin was thawed and ready by noon. Together, the teams covered the 674 miles 1,085 km/h, which was considered a world record, done in extreme sub-zero temperatures in near blizzard conditions and hurricane-force winds. A number of dogs died during the trip. Second relay. Margaret Kern from the Solomon Roadhouse was infected, which raised fears that the disease might spread from patrons of the Roadhouse to other communities. The 1.1 million units had left Seattle on January 31 and were not due by dog sled until February 8. Welch asked for half the serum to be delivered by aircraft from Fairbanks. He contacted Thompson and Sutherland, and Darling made a test flight the next morning. With his health advisor, Governor Bone concluded the cases in Nome were actually going down and withheld permission, but preparations went ahead. The U.S. Navy moved a minesweeper north from Seattle, and the Signal Corps were ordered to light fires to guide the plans. By February 3, the original 300,000 units had proved to be still effective, and the epidemic was under control. A sixth death, probably unrelated to diphtheria, was widely reported as a new outbreak of the disease. The batch from Seattle arrived on board the Admiral Watson on February 7, acceding to pressure. Governor Bone authorized half to be delivered by plane. On February 8, the first half of the second shipment began its trip by dog sled, while the plane failed to start when a broken radiator shutter caused the engine to overheat. The plane failed the next day as well, and the mission was scrapped. Thompson was gracious in his editorials. Second relay included many of the same drivers, and also faced harsh conditions. Edron delivered the serum to Nome during another blizzard after a 90 miles 140 run on February 15. Aftermath. Statue of Balto, led dog on the last relay team. The statue is located in Central Park, NYC, and is dedicated to all the dogs involved in a serum run. Death toll from diphtheria in Nome is officially listed as either 5, 6, or 7, but Welch later estimated there were probably at least 100 additional cases among the Eskimo camps outside the city. The natives have a habit of burying their children without reporting the death. 43 new cases were diagnosed in 1926, but they were easily managed with the fresh supply of serum. Footnotes: 235, 243 all participants in the dog sleds received letters of commendation from President Calvin Coolidge, and the Senate stopped work to recognize the event. Each musher during the first relay received a gold medal from the H.K. Mulford Company. The mayor of Los Angeles presented a bone-shaped key to the city to Balto in front of City Hall, and silent film actress Mary Pickford put a wreath around the canine's neck. Poems and letters from children poured in, and spontaneous fundraising campaigns sprang up around the country. Governor Kazan and his team became celebrities and toured the West Coast from February 1925 to February 1926, and also starred in a 30-minute film entitled Balto's Race to Nome. A statue of Balto by sculptor Frederick Roth was unveiled in New York City's Central Park during a visit on December 15, 1925. Balto and the other dogs later became part of a sideshow and lived in horrible conditions until they were rescued by George Kimball, who organized a fundraising campaign by the children of Cleveland, Ohio. On March 19, 1927, the dogs received a hero's welcome as they arrived at their permanent home at the Cleveland Zoo. Because of his age, Balto was euthanized on March 14, 1933, at the age of 14. He was mounted and placed on display in the Cleveland Museum of Natural History in October 1926. Sepala took Togo and his team on a tour from Seattle to California and then across the Midwest to New England, and consistently drew huge crowds. They were featured at Madison Square Garden in New York City for 10 days, and Togo received a gold medal from Roald Amundsen in New England. Sepala's team of Siberians ran in many races, easily defeating the local Chinooks of Arthur Walden. Sepala entered into a partnership with Elizabeth Emricker in Poland Spring, Maine, where many of his dogs went to live in retirement and contribute to their breeding program of Siberian sled dogs, including Togo, who sired many litters. Sepala visited Togo and was by his side when he was euthanized on December 5, 1929, at the age of 16. After his death, Sepala had Togo preserved and mounted, and today the dog is on display in a glass case at the Iditarod Museum in Wasilla, Alaska. Togo's prowess as a sled dog also led to his strengths being preserved through breeding, with his descendants contributing to the Sepala Siberian Sledding, a sought-after working sled dog line, as well as the mainstream show-stock Siberian Husky gene pool. None of the other mushers received the same degree of attention. Though Wild Bill Shannon briefly toured with Blackie, the media largely ignored the Alaska native mushers, who covered two-thirds of the distance to Nome. According to Edgar Calland, it was just an everyday occurrence as far as we were concerned. 255 The serum race helped spur the Kelly Act, which was signed into law on February 2. The bill allowed private aviation companies to bid on mail delivery contracts. Technology improved and, within a decade, air mail routes were established in Alaska. The last mail delivery by private dog sled under contract took place in 1938, and the last U.S. Post Office dog sled route closed in 1963. Dog sledding remained popular in the rural interior but became nearly extinct when snowmobiles spread in the Urs. Mushing was revitalized as a recreational sport in the Urs with the immense popularity of the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race. While the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race, which runs more than 1,000 miles 1,600 from Anchorage to Nome, is actually based on the All-Alaska Sweepstakes, it has many traditions that commemorate the race to deliver the serum to Nome, especially Sepala and Togo. The honorary musher for the first 7 races was Leonhard Sepala. Other serum run participants, including Wild Bill Shannon, Edgar Calland, Bill McCarty, Charlie Evans, Edgar Nollner, Harry Pitka, and Henry Ivanov, have also been honored. The 2005 Iditarod honored Jurdas Winther Baxter, the last known survivor of the epidemic. The position is now known as Leonhard Sepala's honorary musher. The Leonhard Sepala Humanitarian Award is given to the musher who provides the best dog care while still remaining competitive, and the Leonhard Sepala Heritage Grant is an Iditarod scholarship. The 2 races follow the same route from Ruby to Nome. A reenactment of the serum run was held in 1975, which took 6 days longer than the 1925 serum run, or more than twice the total time. Many of the participants were descendants of the original 20. In 1985, President Ronald Reagan sent a letter of recognition to Charlie Evans, Edgar Nollner, and Bill McCarty, the only remaining survivors. Nollner was the last to die on January 18, 1999, of a heart attack. A relay has been depicted in various media. Shortly before World War II, Czech teacher and writer František Omelka was fascinated by the story, writing the novelette after Relay published in Czech in 1946. As an avid Esperantist, Omelka himself translated it into Esperanto, with subsequent translations into German, Dutch, Frisian, Icelandic, Chinese, Japanese, and English. In 1976, the story was retold in Race Against Death, a true story of the far north by children's author Seymour Wright. Wright's book was featured in a 1978 episode of The Book Bird, a PBS program where host John Robbins illustrated key scenes from the book being discussed. The 1995 animated film Balto was loosely based on the events of the final leg of the serum run, although all of the characters besides Balto are fictional. A detailed recounting of the people and events involved in the serum run, including the story of the native mushers and the local nurses who attended to the sick and dying, is included in the 2003 book The Cruelest Miles, The Heroic Story of Dogs and Men in a Race Against an Epidemic, by Gay and Lainey Salisbury. In 2013, a documentary titled Expound the Greatest Dog Story Ever Told focused on the aftermath of the events. The Great Alaskan Race, a 2019 film produced by Rebel Road Entertainment, is based on the serum run. Togo, produced by Walt Disney Pictures, debuted on December 20, 2019 on Disney. Sled dog credit. There is much controversy surrounding Balto's role in the serum run and the statue in Central Park. A premier musher, Sepala ran 170 miles 270 east from Nome to just outside Shaktoolik, where he met the serum runner. To his surprise, since he had anticipated having to go all the way to Nileto and back alone, took the handoff and returned another 91 miles 146 km, having run over 261 miles 420 km across some of the most dangerous and treacherous parts of the run in total. He then handed the serum off to Charlie Olson. Olson carried it 25 miles 40 km to Bluff, where he turned it over to gunner Kazan. Kazan was supposed to hand off the serum to Ron at port safety, but Ron had gone to sleep and Kazan decided to keep going to Nome. In all, Kazan and Balto ran a total of 53 miles 85 km. Kazan maintained that he decided to continue since there were no lights on in the cabin where Ron was sleeping and he did not want to waste time, but many, including Ron, based on conversations the two men had before leaving Nome, and other decorated mushers in the surrounding area, thought his decision to not wake Ron was motivated by a desire to grab the glory for himself and Balto. According to Togo's musher, Leonhard Sepala, who was also Balto's owner, Balto was a scrub freight dog that he left behind when he set out on the trip. He also asserted that Kazan's lead dog was actually a dog named Fox, but that news agents of the time thought that Balto was a more newsworthy name. No record exists of Sepala ever having used Balto as a leader in runs or races prior to 1925, and Sepala himself stated Balto was never in a winning team because the pictures and video of Kazan and Balto taken in Nome were recreated hours after their arrival once the sun had risen. Speculation still exists as to whether Balto's position as lead dog was genuine or was staged or exaggerated for media purposes. The Central Park statue of Balto was modeled after Balto, but shows him wearing Togo's colors awards. The inscription reads, "Dedicated to the indomitable spirit of the sled dogs that relayed antitoxin 600 miles over rough ice, across treacherous waters, through Arctic blizzards, from Nenana to the relief of stricken Nome." In the last years of his life, Sepala was heartbroken by the way the credit had gone to Balto. In his mind, Togo was the real hero of the serum race. According to the National Park Service, in 1960, Sepala said he never had a better dog than Togo. His stamina, loyalty, and intelligence could not be improved upon. Togo was the best dog that ever traveled the Alaska Trail. Steinmetz, writing in Time magazine, also thought that Togo was the greatest sled dog of all time. In the serum run, she wrote, "Togo was the real hero. The dog that often gets credit for eventually saving the town is Balto, but he just happened to run the last 55 miles leg in the race. The sled dog who did the lion's share of the work was Togo." His journey, fraught with whiteout storms, was the longest by 200 miles and included a traverse across perilous Norton Sound where he saved his team and driver in a courageous swim through ice floes. Relay participants and distances. Mushers in order and the distances they covered. 263 most legs were planned to be about 25 miles 40 km long, generally accepted as an extreme day's mush. Sources: Page, Dorothy G. 1992. Polar Pilot, Danville, IL, Interstate Publishers, ISBN 08000 134 2936 6.